Hey, it's David. Let's see what's involved in creating the seat base for the bobber build. So last time we finished off actually building the seat mountings, so the seat is ready to be bolted on. But first we need something to bolt it to. So this is what this session is about here in the shed. So let's go and see what needs to be done. So let's remind ourselves what we've got. So the main issue is we've got a spring running through here, we've got a flat mounting plate at the back here, we've got an angled mounting plate at the front, which is awkwardly shaped because we've got this big lip where the stock seat actually locks into. I think we're okay to run from here to here, but inevitably we're going to actually drop down below that a little bit. So let's see how this works out. I've cut a piece of tube slightly over long so that this is what I'm thinking of actually putting in. I did have the piece of tube I cut out last time and did some work on, but I'm looking to see if I can use this instead. But we'll see, we might end up back with the other one. Now I've just cut a little test piece because what I'm looking to do, if it works, and if I have a straight line all the way down, is to cut the tube in half and then re-weld it back in like this. And the idea of this, although this tube is much too small, is to give a little bit of clearance. I don't drop my on here, so that if I'm dropping below, there's a little bit of extra clearance in there. But we'll see. I need to mock this up and see how it works, and really you'd need a piece of tubing this size to actually create that, and that's really not going to work. I took that piece of tube and I've sliced it in half, turned it upside down as I showed before, tacked it in place, cut it off, welded it, and I've roughly ground it. So now we can see that. So now effectively I've got a piece of double skinned tubing, which should provide me with a stronger mount, because that is now much more rigid than it was before. I've got a little bit more cleaning up to do, and I've roughly trimmed the ends to where they need to be. Still a bit more work to do on this, but first we need to find a way of attaching it to the bike. So this is going to fit approximately here, and that will allow the seat posts to mount into the top. I'm going to have to drill a hole through there and weld it in place, but first of all we need to fix this to here. So with the magic of CAD, I've made up a couple of mock brackets. And that will sit something like that. There's a bit of trimming and stuff to be done. So what needs to happen now is to turn these bits of cardboard into steel. So both brackets have got a little bit of a bend in them. This one's a little bit shallower, but it does lift up a bit here because this bracket actually points further down than the bottom here. So there's a little bit of a bend here and slightly more of a bend here. Because we've got a bit of a wobble in here. A little more fettling, a little more fiddling, and we will be ready to tack these together. So this is now tacked in place. So I've tacked twice each side at each end. Hopefully that will keep it rigid enough that I can now weld it up a bit more strongly. Weld it up, and it's now bolted down in place. Some nut plates for the back are definitely on order because it's quite awkward getting the nuts on the back of there. Now I've bolted the tube into the frame so that I've effectively got that cross member there. I now need to drill down into it and create a hole. Now the only hole saw I have of about the right size is slightly oversized, so I'm going to have a very loose fit, but that's not bad because I can fill that with weld and build up a deeper joint, so that'll be okay. I think it's going to take a lot of stress of someone sitting on that, so it needs to be a strong joint. So I'd rather have something that's a little bit bigger than something that's a perfect fit, would then only have a thin amount of weld to join the two surfaces together. But first I've actually got to make sure that the hole is drilled exactly square and upright. That was a bit more force than I intended. Not sure if this is up to the task. So let's find out. So I've not bolted it in, I've just placed it in with the bolts to stop it sliding around because it's on a slope. So this is a piece that I cut out of the old tube, so it's got the clamp welded to the top. I can cut this clamp off and cut a new piece of tube because this is a bit mangled up, but I don't think that'll matter because that will all be in the welded zone. But you'll notice there's a keyhole slot cut here to allow the tube to be squashed closed. So if I use a new bit of tube, I've got to drill a hole and with a grinder make a new slot, and that's all perfectly possible and doable, no issue with that. But it does mean that that's the most I can put this in to here. If that goes below the surface there, then it'll get welded up and then it won't be able to squash shut. So I've got to keep at least that much clear, and that means it'll sit there at its lowest point. And I will be putting in as low as I can so that I've got the maximum amount of travel with the seat post. Now, seat posts always have a minimum insertion point. You've always got to have at least a certain amount of tube inside the other tube, because otherwise it's weak and it will bend the tube once you put some weight on it. So for this one, the marker is there, so as you can see, that pretty much brings it down to this bottom cut line here where I cut it at the weld out. So I need to chop this tube off a bit because it sticks below the surface, but I can cut it no more than that much, because that's the minimum amount of tube that needs to go into there. It's got to have at least that much for structural strength. So how does it work with a saddle? Well, all the way down will be there. Of course, it's not going to go all the way down for the reasons I just said. So it'll sit there at its minimum, and it can come up again, but only a certain amount before it, because I've got to leave that minimum amount of tube in there. Now, what I can do, of course, is have different length seat posts. I've got two seat posts. I've got this one, which is the original seat post for this old bike, and I've got this one, which is a cheap replacement. So I can actually have, if I would decide I want the seat, if I want the seat higher, I can simply cut this one down to size and have it a little bit longer than this one, and this can be the short seat post for the lower length. So I'm going to now put some tacks on this, and then see how that works. You will have noticed I've cut this top edge off here, which is always the intention. It now matches this, and when I've finished, this is going to be a much more neat extension of this bracket. And when this is sprayed black like the frame, this should effectively disappear into the frame. So let's get this welded in. So once again, I'm out of time, but saddle is now mounted on the bike. Show you in just a moment. It's not finished, there's still more work to be done. There's at least one more session in the shed before it's done, and that's putting aside finishing and painting and all that sort of stuff. There's some more welding to be done, and there's a little bit more fabrication that needs to be done, but I'll cover that in the next session. So now let's go and have a look at it. So here it is. Mounted. Don't look too closely at the welds because they're pretty bad, and it's only actually tacked on at the moment. It's sitting a little higher than I originally intended. It can go down a little bit. I've got it set high at the moment just because it's bottoming out underneath on the seat post. That needs to be trimmed. It's one of those finishing things. I'm not worried about that at the moment. But overall, that's very much the look that I was looking for. So, more of a traditional, what one of these would have looked like back in the day, in my opinion. Your opinion may vary. So, more of this next time. So that's it. Thanks very much for coming along and being part of my voyage in the shed on this build. So I will see you guys again soon.